Greetings. Welcome to Lost in Transmission, episode 11, where we continue with the coherence-based genealogical method. Time permitting, we're going to cover how the coherence-based genealogical method is changing textual criticism in terms of textual changes, in terms of less certainty overall, the rejection of text types, the vindication of the Byzantine text, and a shift in goal of textual criticism for the New Testament. So first of all, there are changes to the text that the method brings about. The first and most obvious changes introduced to the use of the coherence-based genealogical method are changes to the text of the NA and UBS editions. In the Catholic letters, there are a total of 34 such changes, and in Acts there are 52. In most cases, these are minor, significant for interpretation or translation. In the Catholic letters, most are not even included in the UBS apparatus, but a few deserve our attention. The choice of subject is Jude 5, for example, is a notoriously difficult textual problem, where the text of the previous edition said that the Lord, ha Kyrios, once saved a people from Egypt. It is now attributes this ancient deliverance to Jesus, Jesus himself, a change with not insignificant implications for New Testament Christology. So it's a change from Kyrios to Jesus, a change from Lord to Jesus. Now, Jesus could mean Joshua, is what it could mean. But if you do a study on it, you see through cross references, it could cause problems, but we'll read on. In 1 Peter 4:16, Christians are encouraged not to be ashamed in their suffering, but instead to glorify God. Previously, they were told to do so in bearing the name Christian, ento onamati tuto, whereas now they are encouraged to do so in the matter of their suffering, ento mere totu. So the difference here is in the name, onomati, and it no longer says name, it's matter, this mere, matter versus name. The final example is 2 Peter 3:10, where the previous edition said that in the last days the earth and all its works will be found. Eurethesatai. You can see the eureka, found. In the new NA and UBS text, now reads just the opposite. The earth and that all is in it will not be found. Uk eurethesatai. So they add this negative particle. The new reading sits much easier with the surrounding context, but is only attested in a few Coptic and Syriac manuscripts. That is, their only translations. There's no Greek manuscript support at all, which is quite exceptional. Clearly, these changes will affect not only modern Bible translations and commentaries, but possibly even theology and preaching. So what's interesting here is that the coherence-based genealogical method is choosing a translation that doesn't have any manuscript support at all. That's interesting. So there's a example of a text without an extant manuscript that's attested by translation, and this variant's been around for a long time, though. If you look at the list of variants in older editions, it's been around. It's known, and there's a lot of variants to that passage, 2 Peter 3:10. There's a lot of variant readings. It's just not eurethesatai and uk eurethesatai. There's also kata keiesatai, and like the old received text. It's about burned up, right? The earth shall be found burned up. So it's totally different. Anyway, next topic is slightly more uncertainty about the text overall. So that's reassuring, isn't it? A second type of textual change is less obvious but still worth noting. Along with the changes to the text just mentioned, there has also been a slight increase in the ECM editor's uncertainty about the text, an uncertainty that has been de facto adopted by the editors of NA and UBS. In the previous editions of NA and UBS, the editors marked certain words with square brackets if they were not completely convinced of the originality. For example, you can see that in the ending of Mark. They'll put brackets around it, or the pericope of the woman caught in adultery. They'll put that in brackets saying that this probably doesn't belong, but they leave it in because it's been in the received text and it's in traditional readings and so on. So they don't use brackets anymore. Instead, they put in these diamonds. Okay, so in contrast, the newest editions have dropped these brackets in the Catholic letters in favor of a diamond placed in the text and apparatus. So basically saying, you decide, reader. The new symbol, adopted from the ECM, marks places where the ECM editors formally refrain from any rating as to which reading is preferred. So they just punt on it. They let you decide. In these instances, the text of the primary line is split in the ECM edition. Very postmodern idea, isn't it? You know, instead of sitting around at the community group Bible study, well, to me, my translation says this or my translation says that. You can say, well, I believe that this text doesn't belong. Anyway, it's just a more postmodern thought here. In other words, their uncertainty is such that they refuse to offer any indication as to which reading they prefer. In NA and UBS, they still have to print one reading in the main text and one in the apparatus, of course, with the choice apparently not intended to indicate any preference. So just because they put it in the text, if there's a diamond, it means they flipped a coin or whatever and there's no preference as to which variant they preferred. In all, there were in the Catholic letters 32 uses of brackets compared to 43 uses of diamonds, and in Acts 78 cases of brackets compared to 155 diamonds. This means that there has been an increase in both the number of places marked as uncertain and an increase of the level of uncertainty being marked. Overall, then, this reflects a slightly greater uncertainty about the earliest text on the part of the editors. Now, this 133 rejection of text type is huge. You know, if you followed along the previous episodes, you will note that beginning with Westcott and Hort and all throughout the 21st century with Bruce Metzger and Bart Ehrman and that school of scholars that dominated New Testament textual criticism during the 20th century, they would resolve the variants mostly by text type. So if anything came from the Alexandrian text type, for example, the Codex Vaticanus or the Codex Sinaiticus, they would trump any other reading because they considered the Alexandrian text types to be oldest and best manuscripts. But that's been discarded. So here we'll read on. So the two previous changes are easy to quantify. However, the CBGM has also introduced several far-reaching changes in how the editors view and describe the history of the text. The most significant, and for that reason controversial, is that it has convinced the editors to abandon the concept of text types traditionally used to evaluate and group manuscripts. For more than 2 centuries, New Testament scholars have spoken about the Alexandrian, Western, Byzantine, or Eastern or Syrian, and sometimes Caesarean texts. An early pioneer, J.A. Bengal, 1687 to 1752, took on the task of sorting out the wealth of source materials in order to reconstruct the earliest texts of the New Testament. He divided the textual witnesses into groups that he called nations and families. J.S. Semler, 1725 to 1791, and J.J. Griesbach, 1745 to 1812, refined Bengal's scheme by connecting these textual groupings to geographical areas where the text might have been revised apart from normal copying. The divisions were as followed: Alexandrian, used by Origen; Western, which are Latin traditions; and Eastern, used by Antiochian and Constantinopolitan churches. Griesbach added the 4th century Codex Vaticanus as well as additional Alexandrian church fathers to the Alexandrian group. Scholars have largely followed this division into 3 major groups or text types, to use the term established through the work of E.C. Caldwell in the second half of the 20th century. Although few scholars today associate these text types with distinct locales, most still do associate them with distinct levels of importance. The Alexandrian is typically considered the most reliable text type, with the Western, Caesarean, and Byzantine generally following in that order. If one reads Bruce Metzger's well-known textual commentary that accompanies the UBS, the notion of text type is absolutely essential to the explanation of the history of the textual to the New Testament text, and with it to practice the textual criticism itself. Let me take a break here. So in episode 9, we did heavily consult this commentary, Bruce Metzger's commentary. And what it is, it's the rationale. Back when they had a board of scholars sit around and opine over the variants using their heuristics, their rules, and then they came up with decisions on the variants, or put them in brackets if they weren't sure, and then they marked them A, B, C, D, or E based on their certainty. They would document their rationale and explain their decisions, and that was called, that commentary is no longer published, because now they just punt to the coherent space genealogical method, and there's not a lot of explanation. It's just what the computer algorithm decides. So that's a big shift. So what they're saying is they've abolished, and forgot to say that many times when you're reading the Bruce Metzger's compilation on that commentary, their decision on resolving a variant will be based on the fact that one of the Alexandrian texts has that variant. So that wins, because they consider the Alexandrian text to be the most reliable text type. So it would trump any other reading, regardless of how tradition might have had readings for a very long time, right? Back to the reading. The UBS committee's own explanations for its decisions are so regularly couched in these categories that it is hard to imagine Metzger's commentary without them, like what I just said. Their importance is well captured by Eldon Epp, who says that to write the history of the NT text is to write the history of these text types, and the non-committantly to write also the history of the criteria for the priority of readings. For many, the practice of New Testament textual criticism can hardly be conceived of without these comfortable categories, but this is precisely what the editors using the CBGM have done. They have replaced the relationships and value of the text types with the relationships and value of individual witnesses, well over 100 of them in the Catholic letters. Because the computer can track all of these witnesses and their place in the transmission, there's no need to group them into few text types and relate these groups. More importantly, by focusing on individual witnesses, they completely bypass a difficult problem of defining text types and their boundaries. One exception... Pay attention. One exception here is the editors still recognize the Byzantine text as a distinct text form in its own right. This is due to the remarkable agreement that one finds in our late Byzantine manuscripts. Their agreement is such that it is hard to deny that they should be grouped. In fact, the editors using the CBGM do group them together, subsuming them in an apparatus under the symbol Biz. On the other hand, the editors want to avoid the term text type to describe Byzantine text because it brings with it the notion of textual revision or recension, a notion that persists in spite of the attempt to redefine text types as a process. In other words, the Byzantine textual tradition should be regarded as the result of a long process, albeit one that produced a distinct text form preserved in a huge group of similar manuscripts. So, the coherent space genealogical method basically debunks Bruce Metzger's commentary. Some of the rationale in the commentary still hold true, because a lot of those principles do move forward and are loaded into the computer algorithm. But since they no longer make decisions solely based on text type, because the computer can track all the individual ones and do all the comparisons of the coherence and non-coherence, they found that the only text type that held together, that made it through this process, was the Byzantine text, which, by the way, very much agrees with the traditional text, like the received text and so on. And so this Byzantine text is the text that, this is probably an oversimplification. Let's say that it's the text that has been preserved by the tradition of the Greek Orthodox tradition. And so it is a tradition, a heritage that's been preserved. Now, that's not to say it's been perfectly preserved. It's not. There are variants within the Byzantine group, but it is so coherent that it survived this entire process to be the only surviving text type, even though they don't like to use that word anymore. So here we'll go on with the renewed appreciation for the Byzantine text. As just noted, the editors still accept a Byzantine group, even if they do not view it as a traditional text type. And then it goes into some data, and you can read this for yourself. But keep in mind, though, that this is only relevant to the Catholic epistles and Acts. And as more work is done, this may change, right? But it's very interesting that the Byzantine text is now, instead of considered the worst of the group, is now considered the best. And now it's favored. And that is very interesting for people who hold to tradition and other sort of alternative responses to textual criticism. And I'll have more on that to end this video. Let's finish this last point. A slight shift in goal. A final but important shift has also come in terms of the editor's primary goal. Whereas textual critics have traditionally, though not always, pursued the original text of the New Testament, there's been a growing awareness in recent years about the ambiguity of the term. Some believe that the term original text is simply too vague to be meaningful and is therefore a cause of confusion. Others go further and argue that the very notion of a single authorial text for the New Testament is indefensible. In the midst of the debate, the CBGM has introduced a new goal and a new term to go with it. This new goal is to reconstruct not the original, but the Ausgang text, the original text or the earliest text. So there have been some responses to the coherence-based genealogical method, and we'll start here. Despite this high praise, the reaction to the CBGM has typically fallen into one of two categories. In the first are those who are curiously optimistic about it. In our experience, scholars, students, pastors, and translators want to know why a part of their Greek New Testament is now different. They naturally want to understand what the changes mean and why they were made. They also want to know how they can use the new method in their own work, but they have a struggle to understand it. A second reaction has been from those who are more cautious, perhaps confused, and in some cases even frustrated or suspicious. The CBGM is certainly not the easiest thing to understand. Its diagrams, numbers, and statistics seem to defy simple explanation. As Stephen Carlson says, I have to admit that the CBGM looks like a mysterious black box whose inner working seems inscrutable. Likewise, there are more experienced textual critics have confessed that many will admit that the functioning of the CBGM is not always easily grasped. So it's a black box that's complex and it's operated by just a handful. It's like priestcraft, right? It's a black box, a complex and mysterious device whose internal workings are known only to the initiated. This book is designed to open the box and dispel the mystery. Well, okay, sure. But again, a lot of it is subjective. And this is where I want to make my case that depending on a scientific method to reconstruct the Bible is folly in a way. I mean, sure, use the tools the best we can. But the reason that I'm a Christian is because the faith was passed on, lovingly passed on from the time of Jesus through the apostles to the present day. And that is what I have faith in. I don't have faith in science. I don't need to prove my worldview. I wouldn't even try to prove my worldview. My worldview doesn't even adhere to Francis Bacon and the scientific method in that way. It doesn't mean I don't believe in science. I do. But it's not my worldview. It's where I differ from some people is some people try to prove creation or prove Christianity or prove the existence of God. And there's theistic proofs to some degree, but they are somewhat convincing, I suppose. But in things like intelligent design, look, there are pushback and other alternatives. And I believe in the Christian faith because of tradition that has been passed on and subjectively and how it's transformed my life and what it does in my life. And so I would say that this textual criticism has always been somewhat of a threat to the inerrancy of the Bible, the historicity of the Bible. I would say it's even more of a problem for the Protestant tradition of sola scriptura that tries to just stand on the Bible of its own. And so some responses that are coming about based upon this, some reactions, is some people are just taking a snapshot. Like John MacArthur came out with the Legacy edition and of the whatever his version is, I forget, but they just take a snapshot and say, okay, we're done. We'll see how long that lasts. The English Standard Version was going to do that, but they reconsidered and they did not do it. And so they're going to continue to try to keep up. There's our different movements. Of course, there's always been the King James only types. That's been around since the 20th century and earlier, just due to textual criticism of the 20th century ilk that they were unsettled by the Bible changing, right? And then more recent and a little bit more thoughtful are those like Edward Hillis, a Presbyterian who defended the King James, but for a little bit more scholarly reasons, but still a suspicion towards rational thinking, the Enlightenment, and just the whole epistemology of philosophy since the Enlightenment, since the Reformation, really. And really, it is Protestant type thinking that ushers in the scientific method, that sort of mind set. But that's a bigger topic than I'm willing to take on right here. Then finally, there is a sort of a Textus Receptus movement where they want to stick with the received text because of its being providentially reserved, that it's had a good run, that the Protestant Reformation they look at as an act of God's special providence, and that the Bible that came out of that era is the real Bible, and that the Reformation was based on a providentially preserved text. So they sort of canonize an era. Their criticism of this Byzantine priority, though, would be that you're canonizing a geographical area. Then there's a majority text, Robinson and Pierpont, where they just take a majority reading. But, there's no silver bullet. And so that's where I just get back to depending on a tradition, on how the text is traditionally preserved, how the teachings are preserved. The fact that you can reconstruct most of the New Testament through the writings of the Church Fathers. Those are things I take, that I rest in. And, okay, people will criticize that, saying that the Orthodox won politically, basically. And, and again, that comes with, I can't prove that scientifically, that Ignatius of Antioch may have been the first heretic that totally subverted the faith, and so on. I mean, you could say that, and I couldn't prove that that's not true. But you can turn to things like the Didache, which is a very early writing. You can see that you can sort of build a thread of tradition from pretty early that I feel pretty confident in. Again, it's not ironclad like a scientific method, but it's good enough for me. But it seems like God always leaves enough room for faith. And so those are my thoughts on it. And I'm sure there's others that could articulate them better, but I don't know that I want to continue. I think this might be the last episode of this series. And if you found this series to be edifying and compelling, please subscribe to my channel and please like the video. So thanks very much for your attention, and God bless.